again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. An extremely volatile topic today, and I know the comments are going to be on fire. Let's try to behave. What's a conspiracy theory that's so obviously true, yet people still don't believe it? Please remember to like, share, respect your fellow human, and subscribe. I'm 95% convinced r/AskReddit is a data mining operation, as in, a lot of the posts are specifically generated to gather data on you. 90% of the global plastic waste is pre-consumer material from 10 companies. That big fossil fuel had fought and sabotaged clean energy and clean transportation and environmentalists for decades. Lots of conspiracy nuts believe environmentalism is a scam because big companies just openly polluting is too obvious. Occam's razor dictates that the simplest explanation is usually the right one. This holds true for real conspiracies as well. Yes, big companies just openly pollute and don't care. Like it's not even a conspiracy. They just don't care. MKUltra. People who aren't into conspiracy theories and haven't heard of it would probably not believe the US actually tried to make astral projection spies by giving people LSD and torturing them, lol. But there's also a lot of BS claims about it that aren't true. Big Pharma essentially directly created the opioid crisis in the US and Canada with a series of profit-motivated misleading campaigns around opioids in the 80s and 90s. The crux was in the mid-90s, when Purdue Pharma ran a misleading ad campaign and convinced doctors that their new med OxyContin was safe, non-addictive, and excellent for chronic pain, even more so than other opiates. They personally visited doctors to sell this idea who believed them. It became overprescribed and led to widespread addiction, and since they knew it was addictive at the time, they were fined $635 million in a 2007 lawsuit. Around this same time, OxyContin became harder to access, and the formula was also changed to make it harder to crush and snort the pills. Thus, opioids users turned to other opiates like heroin, which were more accessible. Then around 2012, dealers began to realize that they could acquire fentanyl much cheaper, which is much stronger than heroin. By diluting the fentanyl and calling it heroin, they could make more profit. But most dealers used unsophisticated equipment like hand blenders to dilute their supply, and were themselves unaware of how much or how little fentanyl was in each pack they sold. People started dropping like flies, and now we have it, the opioid epidemic. The government enlisted Hollywood in the early 1980s to portray gangster shootings with the guns turned on its side. Rising gang violence coincided with the boom of the drug trade, particularly cocaine. The Fed wanted to minimize gang violence casualties. Turning a gun 90 degrees on its side makes it horribly inaccurate, so the government felt that if wannabe gang members saw movies portraying shooting that way, the gangs would also shoot that way. It's a big part of why gun homicide rates dropped from the early 80s till now. Can't kill someone if you can't shoot a gun accurately. People have a hard time believing the Tuskegee syphilis experiments happened. They came to light 50 years ago, so not necessarily well known to present-day people. So when you tell them, they act like you're wearing a tinfoil hat. Sugar and HCFS aren't that different. The conspiracy I'm referring to is eating fat makes you fat, which the sugar lobby had a deliberate hand in promoting even though the evidence was there. They wanted money over public health, just like pharmaceutical companies and food manufacturers today. The CIA is directly responsible for the creation and funding of modern inner-city gangs by creating and protecting a drug pipeline between drug cartels in South America and their US distributors, Iran-Contra. Well, I think by now this has been proven as absolute fact. If you're looking for a good resource, you could check out the now deceased reporter Gary Webb. Jeremy Renner was actually in a movie about him if you don't like reading. That threads like this are actually run by the government to see who in what info has leaked and how close the people are to the truth. Also, that things like the flat earth theory and lizard people were made up by the government and put into play to discredit conspiracy theorists who are getting too close on actual things. You remember that whole turning the frogs gay thing? It wasn't entirely inaccurate, not entirely accurate either, but not quite as tinfoil hat as it sounded. The government was involved with the assassination of MLK. The King family literally took the government to court over Martin's death and won. The fact that I didn't learn that until adulthood is wild. UFOs, which don't belong to any other nation according to the Pentagon, not really a conspiracy theory anymore, yet people are still extremely dismissive toward the topic due to decades of official denial and ridicule. There are unidentified flying objects that defy our current understanding of physics. Not sure who owns them, but it is true. It's been confirmed by the US military's branches. It's not a conspiracy theory anymore. Who they belong to is the real mystery now. Is it terrestrial or alien? Most likely terrestrial. That the very words conspiracy theory were first used by the governments to try and make these accusations sound less plausible, because then it's just a theory that the CIA used mind control experiments on Harvard students and one ended up being the Unabomber. Crack was designed and created and released to poor communities, especially in the US. Now it's used as a tool to oppress and control the poor and oppressed worldwide by governments for profit and social control. Donald Trump lost the 2020 election fair and square. He did genuinely lose fair and square. There was never any stolen election. The sheer number of people that believe it was stolen is unbelievable. Diamonds are neither rare nor precious, and the only reason they command such ridiculous prices and are a source of such bloody conflict is because the entire supply and distribution network is controlled by De Beers. That 9/11 is an inside job used as an excuse to start yet another war. They just derail it by using a stupid version of jet fuel can't melt steel beams to lump everything together so that people can't talk about it without being ridiculed. The biggest conspiracy theory is that the government is hiding a lot of stuff from us that they don't want us to know because people continue to stand by them and protect their name even though this world and government is corrupt. Everything in the government is corrupt. These so-called people that love their country are tearing it apart. As I type this, they don't care as long as they're living a safe and nice life. They're comfortable. The CIA killed Martin Luther King. His family won in court that the CIA did in fact kill him decades after his death, after trying to free the alleged murderer before his own death. Leading up to January 6, 2021, Trump and dozens of co-conspirators had a multi-layered plan to overthrow the election and install Trump as president. Due to the constitutional crisis this would have caused, they likely would have had him and his successors president for life. That Democrat and Republican politicians are on the same side and are both backed by the same corporations to keep the American citizens too preoccupied fighting with each other so that they don't notice the actual problems. I don't give my opinion here. My job is to read what is shared by other Reddit users. But I'll give you a little bit. This is completely true. Period. Easy. A depressingly vast number of people can't understand the neocolonialism is alive and flourishing. From the US to French to the Chinese, every nation with enough power to be called one of the greats is guilty of it. In an episode of the Boogie Monster podcast, Kyle Kinane was convinced that there was no D.B. Cooper, and the crew took the money. He was kind of joking at first, but the more he talked, the more it made sense and was totally believable. The plastic industry voluntarily putting the recycling symbol with those numbers was intentionally meant to confuse people into thinking all plastic can be recycled. The numbers represent broad categories of plastics. Many recycling centers can't handle more than a few of these numbers. Food waste and residue are contaminants that make it impossible to recycle most plastics. Most plastic that is recycled into things like furniture stuffing and park benches, meaning it is only recycled once. And number 7 plastic just means other and can't be recycled anywhere. Note, this is all specific to plastic, not recycling in general. Lyme's disease was created on Plum Island by the US government, and the mosquitoes contracted it from the animals they tested on, then escaped to the town of Lyme, Connecticut. Lyme, Connecticut is the closest landmass to Plum Island. Democrat and Republicans are both constantly colluding to try and strip away as many rights as possible and get as much wealth as they can from the average Joe. Democrats restrict guns, impose economic sanctions on industries that create jobs, and generally increase taxes across the board. Republicans restrict abortions, remove those taxes from the wealthy, which includes Democrat and Republican leaders alike, and never repeal as many taxes or restrictions as the Democrats impose, and vice versa. Urban legend has it that you can boil a frog without it reacting if you turn up the water slow enough. While not entirely true, this is exactly what they're doing to the people. The right and left wing are part of the same bird, and that bird is a scavenger, more than happy to peck your eyes out for sustenance. Corporations and government deliberately create outrageous conspiracies because they distract people from the more mundane ones. Who cares about three CEOs embezzling millions or a politician's sex scandal if you can read about the plans to rule the world through poisoned ice cream? That Trump incited the January 6th attack on the White House as a means to illegally keep his presidency, he effing did it. We have all the proof we need, but to the right wing, they view his actions as not only justified, but also that he didn't incite the attack. How these two conflicting views come together is beyond me, or why any patriotic American would be okay with this, regardless of who it was. Trump could slit a baby's throat on live television, and MAGA peeps would still find some sort of noble justification for doing it. Noble. American libertarian billionaires are attempting to descend the U.S. into a fascist state where virtually all working regulations are gone and they can get children back into factories. Come on. An incredible amount of evidence is there to show that. Conservatives have fallen in it for hook, line, and sinker. The more insane conspiracy theories, like lizard people, are spread by the government in order to convince crazy people to believe in them, so that when the average Joe thinks about conspiracy theories, he thinks about flat Earth instead of believable things like false flag attacks and such. Operation High Jump. Admiral Byrd found crazy shit in Antarctica. Nazis, UAF, underground cave systems that stretched continent to continent. There used to be really good videos of it on YouTube, but most of them got taken down. Fascinating stuff. Now, Antarctica is a fascinating topic for me, and this is something I would love to hear and learn more about. Also, again, reminder, be kind in the comments. We all know the COVID vax didn't work, and it's just for profit, and they made that virus in a lab, but people don't want to admit it. So much evidence is out there. Even the milquetoast breaking points gets it right, but people still are so invested in the lie. The concept of private property was just a way to get more control over populations by destroying the commons and atomizing communities until they become dependent on the rulers for survival. And it worked. That in the 2010s, there was a Russian state-sponsored disinformation warfare campaign against the world that happened through social media, intended to exploit weaknesses in critical thinking in certain populations due to softening from the Cold War propaganda machines being repurposed for politics. I think there was a group of politicians worldwide that were recruited to play into the Russian psyops, with the deal being that they would receive power in return for cooperation with the Kremlin. I think that Trump was one of these politicians' opinion. There are others, though, and I don't think the Republicans were specifically targeted, others being Tulsi Gabbard, Marine Le Pen, Jair Bolsonaro, Erdogan, maybe even Boris Johnson. The reason why proof of this is difficult due to the indirect approach of the actions, the mechanism wasn't directly to political money, it was done through troll farms that directly targeted the people, and so the end result could be argued as the people's will. Meanwhile, the politicians would pay the Kremlin back through relatively unpublicized policy decisions. The reaction, I think, that is because a lot of these false flags narratives and projection-style tactics are characteristics of Putin's apparatus, the one that got him so much power in Russia. It is also interesting that since Russia has become relatively isolated and occupied with Ukraine, this authoritarians are cool wave on social media has fallen flat on its face. Note that Twitter activity did shift after Russia's economy became disconnected. Putin's psyops seem to have gone way back to the days when he was trying to manage his image. If you're old enough to remember when he did a Chuck Norris-style meme floating around. At the time, I think that COVID-19 virus was not completely happenstance, and that even if its release was an accident, it is suspicious that CCC policy is extremely restrictive regarding this virus, and that the way things happened allowed for large shifts in geopolitical dynamics. It is weird how COVID-19 conspiracies are considered right-leaning, while Russian political interference is considered left-leaning. It is weird because coordinated anti-Western CCP and Kremlin action is completely consistent. Maybe this political split for the conspiracies is how the aggressors intend things to play out. To me, it seems obvious that we are in the midst of a great geopolitical power struggle right now. The battlefield is more abstract than in the movies, and if I am right, I would not be surprised if we have gone through what will be considered in the history books as the first attempt at a nation-state on nation-state meme warfare. That every war is fought under false pretenses, or like, you know how in storytelling there's the public reason, personal reason, and private reason, or how we have a public life and a private one. I think in Hellenistic Greece they called it polis or oikos. That example I'll give is Afghanistan. The public reason we went was there an official reason? Counter-terrorism? Something like that. But pretty much everyone knows at this point that the real reason is that the government had been absolutely itching to get control over the poppy fields for a very long time, and a war of counterterrorism was the perfect excuse.